Mandy stared at the well-dressed man standing in front of her, his words echoing in her head. "Amanda Black, you've been served," he said with a slight sadness. There was dead silence in the office, and for a moment, Mandy felt as if time had stopped. In her hand was the death sentence of a 5-year marriage. With a quiet sob, she collapsed into her chair, clutching the papers. Slowly, the office began to come around. The stares, whispers, and disapproving looks began to build up. Suddenly, Mandy heard her friend's soft voice nearby. "Mandy, come on," Kit said softly, taking her friend's hand and setting her on her feet. "Let's get you to the conference room, away from that spotlight." The black-haired 30-year-old woman led her friend away from the gawking co-workers. Those who witnessed the show noted how Mandy went from a boisterous, flirty, fun-loving blonde to a battered woman in just a few minutes. Some saw it as irony or humor. Others saw it as pity. Most already suspected the reason for the divorce. "How? I don't understand," Mandy stammered. Things were just starting to turn for the better. She wrapped her arms around herself, as if the embrace would give her more strength. Kit put her arms around her, trying to comfort her friend. "I don't know, girl," Kit said softly. "Did Eric say anything? Any hints that this was going to happen?" "Just the opposite," she said, panting, "like we were newlyweds again. I thought he was making up for lost time abroad." Kit only flinched slightly, but Mandy noticed it. Mandy mentally went over the last 4 months of her marriage in her head. Ever since Eric had come home from Afghanistan, their sex life had been incredible. It was even better than it had been since his return from Iraq 2.5 years ago. He was so passionate and sensual. "Oh, God," she thought. "Most of the time I can barely walk after this." She smiled sadly, wiping a tear from her eye. "It was so hot and exciting. I mean, after I got back from that business trip last week." Mandy's smile warmed a little. "Oh my God, Keith. Eric just wore me out. We did it so often that I finally begged him to stop." Mandy's smile disappeared as she looked at her friend's questioning face. "No, nothing happened when I was on that trip. I told you it was over," she objected. Kit nodded but didn't smile. "When was the last time Eric just hugged you or just kissed and touched you? Honey, when was the last time he made love to you tenderly?" She sat in a daze, looking questioningly at Kit. "What?" With a determined sigh, Kit looked at her friend before continuing. "Mandy," she asked bluntly, "did he make love to you or just have sex with you?" Mandy covered her face with her hands and sobbed deeply. But why? Why did he do it? She wondered, then suddenly froze. No, he couldn't know, could he? Slowly raising her head, she was horrified. "Oh, God, Kit," she whispered. "He knows. Oh, God, please, no, please, no!" Tears filled Kit's eyes as she hugged her crying friend. She knew Eric pretty well, and if he really did know, it was horrible. Eric nodded, listening on his cell phone. "Thank you, sir," he finally said when he heard that his wife had packages of photos and legal documents delivered. Hanging up, he turned his attention to his laptop. With a simple click, he set in motion a process that would change his unfaithful wife's life forever. She'll remember for the rest of her life, he thought, picking up the phone and dialing the number. "Hello, this is Human Resources," came a pleasant young voice. "What can I do for you?" "Mr. Davis, please," Eric said coldly. "This is Eric Black." "Oh, Mr. Black," said the girl quickly. "Let me transfer you." A few seconds later, Eric was talking to the unsmiling man. The conversation was short. Neither of them raised their voices, but the hostility did not go unnoticed. Finishing the conversation, Eric took a deep breath. Glancing at his phone, he saw that his wife had called him 5 times already. "Not yet," he thought, trying to calm himself down. "Not yet." There was a sharp knock on the conference room door. When Kit opened it, she immediately recognized the 3 men standing before her. The first was a well-dressed older man named Simon Samuels, the vice president and head of their branch. Behind him stood an imposing John Davis, the head of Human Resources. Kit couldn't help but notice that Mr. Davis's face was bright red, and she could have sworn she could see the heat emanating from his face. Behind them stood Anna Prescott, the office manager and Mandy and Kit's boss. "Miss Garnett, we need to speak to Miss Black," Mr. Samuels said grimly. "Thank you for your help, but please return to your desk." All three went into the room and Kit went out, carefully covering the door behind her. "Miss Black, we have a problem," Samuels began. Mandy walked quickly out into the parking lot, trying not to trip. She held tightly the heavy paper envelope Mr. Davis had given her. Inside were pictures, gruesome pictures of her and Sean Thompson, the business manager from the third floor. Mr. Davis briefly recounted his conversation with Eric. Eric threatened to publicize the fact that the company had failed to follow the code of conduct. He told Mr. Davis that he would discuss this with his soon-to-be ex-wife at home before deciding whether to take any legal action. Mr. Davis informed her that they would meet with Sean next time, but that she should go home and talk to her husband before this gets out of hand. He also informed her that they would all sit down with her and discuss her future at the company tomorrow after she met with her husband. Mandy had a hard time finding her car because she was still crying hard. The bright sunlight reflected off the cars, making them a little harder to identify. Her car wasn't that hard to find, though. The big black Hyundai Santa Fe wasn't so easy to hide. Mandy climbed into it, remembering the arguments that had led to Eric finally agreeing to rent a car for her. He'd relented just before he left for Afghanistan. She wiped her eyes, put on her dark glasses, and headed home. A man in an old Chevy sedan parked nearby pressed a button on his phone. "Thanks, Bob," Eric said calmly. No, that's it. Please tell Ron that you guys did a great job and deserve the award. Thanks again. Goodbye." Looking at his laptop, Eric sighed again. One more call, he thought. One more, and there would be no turning back. But why would he even want to go back? All that was left was an unfaithful wife who'd ripped his heart out and a broken marriage he could never put back together again. Eric shook his head and pulled out his cell phone. He quickly dialed the number and waited. First call, second ring, third ring, a soft click, and then silence. Eric sat emotionless, staring at the video stream on his laptop. Finally, after a few minutes, a tear rolled down his cheek. Mandy pulled the big SUV onto the highway and groaned. She hoped she could avoid rush hour traffic. She pounded her fist on the steering wheel. At this speed, she knew her usual 30-minute drive would take over an hour. She thought about her marriage, how unlikely it was that she'd be able to salvage any of it. Eric had found out about her affair. Before Iraq, he might have forgiven her, but not now. The pictures had been taken while he was in Afghanistan. She sobbed, realizing what he must be thinking. Although the odds were slim, she had to try to save the marriage simply because she loved him. Funny way of showing it, isn't it? She reproached herself. Cheated on him more than once, but both times he'd gone abroad to serve his country. She shook her head quickly, as if trying to push away the guilt and shame, but the tears flowed again. Trust was not something that came easily to Eric. His childhood had been rough. His father ran away from him and his mother when he was young, and his mother was an alcoholic. In the 5 years they'd been married, Mandy had only seen his mother twice. Once at their wedding, and once when their son was born. It had taken him years to trust Mandy. When they met in college, she knew he was a soldier. She thought she had accepted it. He had already served 2 years and was on his way to getting an engineering degree. They had dated a year before Eric proposed to her. She could still hear her father's reaction. "No, Mandy, this has nothing to do with Eric," her father said. "I think he'll make a great husband. It's more about you. I don't think you'd make a good military wife. Don't get mad, honey, but it's damn hard to be a good husband or wife when your spouse is gone for a year." Mike Lomax, Mandy's father, had been in the Navy for 4 years when Mandy was a little girl. She could still remember the fights her parents had gotten into during that time. She'd always known that she and her mom had had a rough time and that he didn't want that for his little girl. "You were right, Daddy," Mandy snorted and shook her head. "You were so right. I made a terrible soldier's wife." They bought a very nice starter home, and Eric got a good engineering job. Life seemed so promising, and then Uncle Sam called. When Eric found out about his assignment, she scolded him mercilessly for leaving her. To top it off, when Eric left for Iraq, she was already 4 months pregnant. Mandy wiped her eyes as she made her way through the flow of traffic. She remembered the loneliness she felt as she continued on without Eric. Sure, her mom and dad had done everything they could to help, but the sleepless nights alone ate away at her. She needed Eric to hold her all this time, to hear his voice whispering that everything was going to be okay. But he wasn't there for her. She realized she was being selfish, but that didn't make the nights any less cold and lonely. Her mother had moved out in the last month before the baby was born, and that had helped a little. Mandy and her mom Lisa had a very close relationship in most areas. Their personalities were so close that it seemed like they were more like best friends than mother and daughter. But there were some things her mom just didn't want to talk about. The details of her marriage while her husband was in the Navy was one of them. When Mandy tried to turn the conversation to that topic, her mother always got very upset. Eric came home the day after Randy was born. For a moment, Mandy thought they had become a real family, but it didn't last long. He left after only 10 days, and she was alone again. Her mother saw some of the signs and begged her not to give in to them. She kept going on and on about the damage that one mistake could do to the lives of so many people. Of course, she wouldn't go into detail, but Mandy suspected that her father might have been having an affair. They had always been pleasant and polite to each other, even friendly, but never passionate. It was more like they were friends living in the same house. Mandy remembered how she had struggled with depression and loneliness in the months after giving birth. Going back to work helped at first. Then she was assigned to a project with Sean Thompson. Where Eric had the rough, handsome looks of a neighborhood boy, Sean could be a male model. His soft baritone and handsome smile made Mandy's heart skip a beat whenever he entered the room. He held himself with such confidence and made such an impression. She knew he was married to an attractive, wealthy society lady from New York. She and her children had moved to the area just a couple of years ago. She had even met his wife at a party once. She was beautiful, cosmetically speaking, and her personality was perfect for one of those housewife reality shows. But that only made Sean even more arousing. Just a month after they started working together, she gave in to temptation. Gave in? She wrinkled her nose. That's bullshit. I'm the one who flirted with him. A short 2-day business trip with the project team gave her the opportunity to turn that flirtation into a full-blown romance. They dated a few more times, but she cut it short just before Eric returned home. Upon his return, Eric had changed. The carefree country part of him seemed to have died. She knew his trip had been difficult and that he'd lost some close friends while he was there. She even remembered his phone call the day after the worst had happened. The Hummer in front of him had hit an improvised explosive device, killing 3 of his friends and maiming another. Eric took it hard. Mandy remembered letting him cry on the phone because there was little she could say to comfort him. She'd even choked up telling him how much she loved and missed him, mostly because she really meant it, but partly because of her shame at having been with Sean just 5 days ago. For the first few months after his return, she just held Eric in her arms, trying to get him back to his old self. She had no doubt that she loved him, and her affair with Sean was just a season of weakness. Then, when everything seemed to be going so well again, the orders came for his deployment to Afghanistan. She was crushed. It was no surprise that 2 months after his departure, she found herself back in Sean's arms. She knew there was no excuse. But in the end, the loneliness and fear overpowered the guilt. She'd pursued Sean again, and it had taken all her charms to lure him away from the succubus in the marketing department he'd started hanging out with after their affair had ended. She felt her face flush with shame at what she'd done. "Of course you're ashamed, but that didn't stop you, did it?" Mandy reprimanded herself. She tried to hold back the tears but couldn't, feeling the self-loathing pouring out with each new tear. Sean had spent several weekends at her house. He had even managed to talk her into taking on another project. For a moment, Mandy even considered leaving Eric. Then reality set in. She, Randy, and her parents traveled to Fort Bragg, North Carolina to meet Eric when he returned for R&R. The trip there was stressful, to say the least. Mandy was sure her parents suspected her, but they hadn't told her yet. Then she saw Eric, and all worries vanished. When he put his arms around her and kissed her, she remembered why she'd married him in the first place. They spent every hour revitalizing their marriage and strengthening their family. Mandy smiled weakly as she remembered that time. Eric had been so passionate, so tender, so incredibly loving that she had sworn to herself at that moment that she would remain faithful to him for the rest of her life. Then Eric told her that he wasn't going back into the army, that he was going to be a civilian 4 months after returning from Afghanistan. She cried openly, knowing that soon they would be a real family again. When she returned from Fort Bragg, she severed all relations with Sean, much to his disappointment and anger. She put everything she had into preparing for Eric's return. Mandy even started seeing a doctor about her fears and loneliness. She was diagnosed with clinical depression and began receiving counseling and medication. As the months went by, she felt herself getting stronger both mentally and emotionally. Every day she vowed that she would make up for it all by becoming the best wife Eric could ever hope for. Finally, when he returned a few months later, she fulfilled her vows. She didn't deny him anything, not her body, her attention, or any part of her love. Although Kit was right, things were different when Eric came home this time. He was more cautious and didn't share his heart as freely. She just thought it was because of what happened when he was overseas. Now she was beginning to realize that he already knew about her affair, and the thought scared her. Eric stared gloomily out the window, watching the light rain fall on those unlucky enough to get caught. He could tell that the small outbreak wouldn't last long. Soon the sun would shine again. Not yet, Eric thought. Not yet. He stared at the small dot on the laptop screen. It had been stationary for a while, but now it was finally moving. His wife's SUV had been stuck in traffic, but was now moving forward. Taking a deep breath, he looked at his watch. It was time to make the call. Depending on what was said, this could be the last time he spoke to the woman he had deeply loved for the last 6 years of his life. Mandy nearly twisted the steering wheel when her cell phone rang. A quick glance told her it was him. She said a short prayer, took a deep breath, and answered. "Eric?" "Yes, it's me," he answered. "Baby, please," she said, trying to suppress a sob. "Please let me try to explain, to tell you how sorry I am. Honey? Eric?" There was only silence. "Honey," she said, "are you still here?" "Yes, for the moment," he answered briefly. "Honey, where are you? Are you at home with Randy?" "I don't have a home, Mandy," he said, and his voice only gave away the pain for a second. "You took care of that." "Where are you?" "It doesn't matter, I'm just waiting." "For me?" There was hope in her voice. "Like you've been waiting for me, sweetheart." Mandy couldn't hold back the sobs that caught in her throat. She had never heard so much pain and anger in his voice before, and certainly not in hers. "Eric, please, I have so much to say. I screwed up so badly, I know I screwed up, but I need to talk to you. There's so much I need to tell you. I love you, baby, just you." There was silence on the other end of the line. "Okay, Mandy, say what you need to say, but I doubt it'll make a difference. You slept with some other guy while I was gone, not once but many times, so what the hell do you think you can say that's gonna make any difference? Please, Eric, please for us?" She pleaded through her tears. "Don't leave us until I see you, please, baby. Don't leave us!" he hissed. "As you did to us." "No," she screamed into the phone. "I know what I did, but I never gave up on us. I was lonely and scared. I know that's no excuse, but that's the way it was. But I love you and I believe in us, honey. I really want to put things back together." "Are you serious?" he asked in surprise. Eric hesitated, wondering if she really believed what she was saying. "You mean you haven't abandoned us? What about the way you screamed his name when he hit you over and over again? Tell me how the hell could you even think that didn't mean fucking leave us?" All she could do was cry as she made her way through the stream of traffic, trying to get to him as fast as she could. If only she could face him, then he would see the remorse she felt, and then maybe there would be some hope. He continued bitterly. "I finally got proof that my whore of a wife cheated on me while I was in Afghanistan. I guess we were both lucky. I think I could have killed you and that asshole if I had found out while I was in the States. After a few seconds, he sighed. Amanda, this will be our last conversation. If we get disconnected or one of us is put on standby, there won't be another conversation. Eric, please, she pleaded. We can go to a counselor. We can handle this, baby. We really can. Look, there are a few things you need to know before you go home. First of all, I cleaned out all our accounts and maxed out all our credit cards. I think you've been cheating on me for the last 3 years, so I'm returning the favor. He ignored her sigh. You can keep the house because I'm pretty sure I can still smell someone else's odor in our bed. I packed everything I wanted. It ended up only fitting in one suitcase, so the rest is yours. You can keep your SUV, though I don't know how you'll pay for it, as I suspect you'll be laid off tomorrow. I have sent these pictures to all of your coworkers, family, all of our friends, and even our church. I have also sent them and a bunch of videos to several websites along with all your information. I suspect you're about to become very popular. Oh, Eric, no, Mandy sobbed. Why don't you wait until we talk? I waited, Mandy, he said calmly. I waited 4 months after I came back, but you didn't say anything. And you wouldn't have said anything if you hadn't been caught, would you, baby? What could she have said? He was right. As for your little boy toy, Eric grinned, I almost paid him a little visit. But after a few meetings with his wife, I don't think it would be necessary. What a vindictive bitch. You might want to give Sean a little warning. He'd better run. Seems his wife's family has some interesting connections to some very questionable people. I'd be surprised if little Sean makes it a year without an accident. She'll probably come after his little sluts, too. Oh, wait, that includes you, doesn't it? Eric, please give me a chance to make it up to you. Mandy's cell phone beeped. Glancing at it, she recognized the number. Eric, it's Mrs. Johnson from next door. I told you, if you disconnect, we're dead. His tone was threatening. Startled, Mandy answered softly, Okay, baby. I was just worried if something had happened to Randy. Randy's fine, Eric's voice softened. He's with me now, and he's sleeping soundly. She breathed a sigh of relief. Speaking of Sean's wife, Victoria, he said quietly, when the two of you went on your little business trip last week. He was interrupted by Mandy's cell phone ringing. It was another neighbor calling. Honey, it's Mrs. Watson. Are you sure Randy's okay? Yes, Randy and I are perfectly fine, Eric said in a tone so creepy that Mandy began to panic. He grinned. Now about Victoria Thompson. She's quite something. While you and that jerk have been acting like you should have been acting for the last 3 years, I spent 2 days getting to know his wife. Up close. Mandy gasped in anger and pain at her husband's betrayal. Her tears flowed again. I'd like to tell you that she's a hell of a lot better in bed than you are, but the truth is, she's not, he declared. Between her whining about everything she wants and where, how, and when to do it, there's no damn time for pleasure. I'm sure Sean would agree. So congratulations, Mandy. You've won the Best Sex Slut Award. Eric, stop it, please, Mandy begged. Please, just stop. She started sobbing again. She pounded her little fists on the steering wheel, shouting curses at the surrounding cars as they crawled forward. Her composure slowly returned to her, and she wiped away tears of frustration. Okay, Eric, she sniffled. You won. You got your revenge. You broke me. She was silent, waiting for his response, but all she heard was silence. But I still love you, Eric, she said quietly. There's no excuse for what I did. I know that. But all I'm asking for is a chance to make it up to you. I'm begging you, please. Please let me explain myself. There are some medical issues you should know about. If you ever loved me, please meet me. Please, baby. Medical reasons? He snorted. Postpartum depression, clinical depression, bipolarism, heck, try post-traumatic stress disorder. In the end, it didn't matter, did it, Mandy? You went and slept with some other guy anyway. How did I know? It really doesn't matter. As soon as I did, I hired some men to follow you. They did a hell of a job, too, tapping phones and installing cameras all over our house, even putting one in our bedroom. Oh, Eric, she exclaimed. Do you really hate me so much that you're capable of all this? Is there not a drop of love left? Well, there was, he replied quietly, before I saw the video of you and him in our bed. Do you remember that time, Mandy? When Randy walked in on you? Mandy awed. Oh God, no, please, not again. Eric's voice was strained as he tried to control his emotions. Imagine how I felt as I sat there watching my 2-year-old son call another man Daddy. Everything I felt for you died right then as I watched you put our son to bed with both of you. God damn you, you bitch! Eric's voice trembled. I guess I was lucky I didn't know that until we were at Fort Bragg. When I saw it, I was shocked. I almost got lost there, and I was in a place where you can't afford to get lost. Eric looked at his laptop and saw that Mandy was almost home. A cruel smile contorted his handsome face as he continued in a cold tone. As for hurting you, Amanda, I haven't even started yet. I still have a few more. He heard Mandy gasp. Oh my God, she whispered. Surprises, he finished. Mandy pulled her SUV over to the curb and watched in horror as flames engulfed what had once been their home. Like I said, Amanda, the house and everything left in it belongs to you. Mandy shook, still not believing her eyes. Damn, Eric, what have you done? That's a rhetorical question, isn't it? Said Eric with a smirk. I was trained to build under combat conditions, Mandy. Doesn't that make sense? I might know a thing or two about destruction, too? Where's Randy? She shouted. Damn it, Eric, where the hell is my son? Our son is sitting 3 feet away from me, sleeping in his car seat. So tell me, he said mockingly, can you read the message I left in our front yard? What? She mumbled. What message? Oh my God. Eric grinned. I wasn't sure people would be able to read it from the ground. But the news helicopters? They must enjoy the words cheating whore scorched on the front lawn. I wouldn't count on the neighbors' sympathy, he continued. I've posted the pictures all over the neighborhood and paid a few teenagers to hand out extra copies around the block. He paused for a few seconds and listened to his wife's sobs. Mandy? You might want to think, Eric said bitterly, about where you're going to sleep tonight and in the near future. I guess you could sleep in your SUV until they come and get it, or maybe... No, I doubt Sean will be able to help. I'm sure Victoria's already skinning him alive. I guess that just leaves your parents. I wonder how your dad would feel about having 2 whores living under his roof. What? Mandy sobbed through her sobs. Damn it, Mandy, are you really that stupid? You always told me your father cheated on your mother when he was in the Navy. Damn it, your mother cheated on him. Mom? She asked in a trembling voice. Eric laughed cruelly. Oh, hell yes. Your father told me a little about it after I got back from Iraq. Why do you think he did it, Mandy? Do you think he suspected his little girl was cheating on her husband just like her mom? But unlike your father, Eric continued, I can't live with a whore wife for the rest of my life. Maybe he stayed for you, or maybe he still loved her. I don't know, it's his decision. Mine is to start over and hopefully find a woman I can spend the rest of my life with. I'm sure I'll find someone who can love me, be faithful, and be a good mother to Randy. Please, Eric, Mandy sobbed. I can be that kind of wife. Just give me one more chance to show you, and I'm already a good mother to Randy. I'm the only mother he needs. I guess that's what the court has to decide, isn't it? He said calmly. Of course, the fact that I burned down our house and effectively bankrupted us probably won't go in my favor. Eric saw a young man in a t-shirt and baseball cap get out of the cab and stop at the curb, looking in his direction. Eric flashed his headlights twice, and the guy headed toward him. Okay, Mandy, Eric said calmly, looking at his watch. There are a few things you still need to know, and there's not much time left, so listen very carefully. First, so your bosses don't get too worried about my threats. However, Victoria is filing a similar lawsuit and will probably win. I think the court will really like both her and all the evidence I gave her. As for me, Eric coughed, well, I don't like my chances in court, so I took the job overseas. I think Randy and I would really enjoy it. No, Mandy yelled into the phone. You can't take my baby. Actually, bitch, he's my son and I can. Don't, Eric, please, she begged. He's my son, too. Amanda, he said calmly. In a few years, he won't even remember you. But don't worry. I'll send you pictures of him at Christmas, and we'll even call on Mother's Day and his birthday. Since we won't know where you'll be, we'll just call your parents." Mandy cried bitterly, realizing the hopelessness of her situation. Eric sat for a while, concerned and somewhat alarmed by his own actions. He knew he wasn't going to send her pictures or call her. The thought of her desperately waiting for calls that would never come and reliving that revenge for years to come was more cruel than he had previously thought. "Goodbye, bitch," he said coldly. "I hope you rot in hell." He wiped a tear from his cheek as he listened to her hysterical screams begging for a son and hung up the phone. "Captain Black?" asked the guy in a tank top standing in front of him. "Not anymore," Eric smiled weakly. "I'm just Eric Black. Well, at least for a while longer." The young man grinned and handed him an envelope with the numbers and passwords to the offshore bank accounts into which his funds had been transferred, minus some fees, of course. "Here are passports, photo IDs, and plane tickets for Marcus Gray and his son Michael Gray," the teen said, smiling. Eric smiled even wider and began putting his old IDs and 2 SIM cards from his cell phones into a small metal bucket. Smirking, he took a lighter and melted them into a small puddle of blackened plastic. Then he took a small hammer, smashed both phones, and tossed the remnants into the bucket. Satisfied with his work, he tossed the bucket into the trash can. "That was better than I could have imagined," Eric grinned. He quickly pulled out his car keys and handed them to the kid. "Tell Bob and Ron thanks for the rental," he said quietly. "To whom?" the young man asked with a wide smile on his face. "I apologize," Eric grinned. "I must have made a mistake." A few minutes later, Eric was already checking luggage at the airport. He couldn't hold back a smile as he thought about what was in store for him and his son in the next few weeks. His contract didn't start until next month, so they were going to spend a couple weeks on a secluded beach with a pretty lieutenant he'd met in Afghanistan. They'd only been friends then, but now that he'd gotten proof of his wife's cheating, Eric couldn't wait to find out if there was more to it. "Mr. Gray?" The man at the front desk said politely. "Have a wonderful flight, you and your son." Marcus Gray and his son walked through the lobby and started their new life.